Hey guys, what we're gonna look at today is how to make your practice time more efficient. The way that you can do that is what I call accelerated learning. When you use accelerated learning, you seem to kind of accelerate your learning process quicker and faster than you would if you did the old way. The old way would be, you know, play until you drop and do longer time frames and play the same thing for hours on end. But accelerated learning kind of gives you a different take on things. It's almost counterintuitive. It's like you almost think it wouldn't work, but it does. It's really helped me over the long haul of teaching as well as for me as a musician. Now, where I learned accelerated learning from was a man named Howard Roberts. Howard Roberts was a great studio excuse me, jazz guitar player in the day, and he also started a music school called Musicians Institute, which is also at first called GIT, Guitar Institute of Technology. When you walked into GIT at the time, the first thing you would learn is how to do accelerated learning. It's just something that he did in that time. Now, where I got this idea from is I got it from there's an article wandering around somewhere. I think it's on truefire.com. I think you can find it if you type in Truefire and do a search for Howard Roberts. There's a thing on accelerated learning there. David Oakes also has a thing on, I think it's in a Jimmy Weibel lesson, scale concepts with Jimmy Weibel, and David personally talks about how to do accelerated learning there. It has helped quite a few players over the process. And where I got it from was that article on TrueFire, and also the Guitar Compendium. This is a great book. It's a 3-volume set. It's kind of a problem-solving set for guitar players, mostly jazz-oriented, but I shouldn't say that because you could learn to play rock with it. And Howard and Gary Hangberg actually wrote it, as well as a whole bunch of GIT teachers put a lot of effort into it. But those two, Gary and Howard, wrote that, and that's where I'm going to be taking a lot of this from. This, by the way, if you want to buy this volume set, there's no tab, so if you cannot read, it wouldn't hurt you to buy it, but it definitely there's no tab in it, so it's forewarning if you're a tab person, you can't read at this point in time, although that would probably help your reading chops as well. So he would have these problem-solving questions, and the question was, how do I make my practice time more efficient? And I'm just going to read you some of this. The diagnosis is the ills that plague practice sessions are obvious to everyone: fatigue, lapsing into aimless noodling, boredom, feeling that's all impossible, frustration, work that drags on forever without reward, etc. The following checklist helps build a solid defense against these. The remedy is motivation. And I'm just going to read you again. Make sure what you're working on is something that you really want to do and know why you want to do this, and be clear of what you're going to do with what you learn. If it's something someone told you to do and you have some reservation about doing, stop and figure out why you have those reservations. If you decide that you don't want it, then simply don't do it. If you decide that you do want it, then proceed with single-minded purpose. Make sure that what you're working on is something that is motivated for you. You wouldn't want to learn an altered scale if you really wanted to learn how to play a Jimmy Page or a Jimi Hendrix solo. Also, you probably wouldn't want to learn major or minor seventh chords, voicings, or some Ted Green chord melody if you just want to strum around the campfire. So make sure that these are things that you want to do. I always ask questions to students when they come in. Well, what are your goals? And make sure you know what your goals are, and then write down where do well, we wouldn't ask them to do that, but you need to know where your goals are and where you want to go with it. So keep that in mind. The second thing is application. Plan to put what you're working on to use. If you don't use it, you lose it. A lot of people over the years, I've been teaching since 1987, and I've taught anywhere from 60 to 115 students a week. So a lot of times I notice that a lot of students will think, well, if I buy this book, or if I, they think content is what's going to solve the problem. It's really just about not content. It's learning what you need to learn to get where you want to get. It isn't about how many books you buy. You could buy a million books and still not be able to play guitar. But you need to practice those things, and it's all about practicing a limited number of things, even the greatest players in the world. Okay, so anything you want to learn, you have to make sure that you're going to use it. If you don't, you're going to lose it. Super important. Okay, again, you can learn an altered scale, but if you don't know how to use it, what's the use? Okay, we've all gone through those things, and keep that in mind. Notice now when you are practicing, you want no distractions. I like to actually, you know, kind of shut the computer off if I need to. Put the cell phone on silent. Clear your work area of all things not immediately relevant to your task at hand. Make sure there's nothing on there that's going to have you want to do something else. All right. That was number 3. No distractions. Try to keep, play in a nice closed room where no one's going to be bothering you if you can. Also, number 4 is identify new and old. Survey the total task and isolate the parts which you are already familiar with through previous experience. Once you identify the parts you already know, mentally highlight the new sections. So identify what you already know, maybe even review that briefly for about a minute or two. Maybe it's a solo and maybe it's the first 2 bars of that solo. Review that and then look at what you have to do next. Number 5 is small tasks. Take the new section, break it down. Make this subsection so small that the failure due to overload is impossible. 3 or 4 notes at a time is plenty. Anytime I learn a guitar solo or anything, chord solos, I learn 3 or 4 chords, 3 or 4 notes at a time. You could try to, as Howard would say, you could try and learn to play the whole solo if it's 8 bars, 12 bars, 32 bars from beginning to end. But if you can't, as Howard would say, you might need to reconsider. All right, you could try, and some people do, but it's pretty impossible. I usually take 3 or 4 notes and work on those 3 or 4 notes for that task. Okay. Now, the 6th thing is what he calls motor patterning. This amounts to essentially knowing without the slightest doubt exactly where the fingers are to go. If you're in an elevator equipped with a finger trying to push the button and you don't know where it is, you will quite obviously have a very hard time with it. Most problems of execution, that is fingering we're talking about, on the guitar are like the finger, doesn't know where to go. Working with small units as above eliminates this problem. Also, when you're playing, so you're going to play 3 or 4 notes, 3 or 4 chords, and you need to know where the fingers go. Okay? So make sure you know the fingering that you're going to be using. Now, number 7 is make it slow. Play the small units so slowly that a mistake is impossible. If a mistake somehow does slip through, make sure the mistake is not made more than once. Don't let yourself think that you're going to go back and correct it later. B, know why the mistake occurred. If it is above psychomotoring skills, that is, you don't know which finger to use. If so, the solution is very simple. If not, it is the problem execution. Isolate the problem, work only on that as outlined above. Do not repeat the mistake over and over. A lot of people will play the same mistake over and over, and pretty soon that mistake will become part of your playing, and we don't want that. So make sure you play. When I'm playing something, I play it very, very slow, like I'm playing it in slow motion. Also, you have to make also what Howard would say, speed is the byproduct. Speed is the product of accuracy. You've got to play it accurate first before you can speed it up. So if you're speeding up too much and you're making mistakes, you're playing it too fast. Now, number 6, isolate motor skills from learning. Keep in mind that the distinction between learning new material and rehearsing physical motor skills enables you to execute that material. These are separate, and confusing them can lead to the ills mentioned above. If learning is already done, then it is no longer any part of the task of execution. Get away from the paper. So what you want to do is you have to remember there's 2 types to the learning. There's learning the notes and trying to get them down into your memory. And then you have motor skills. Motor skills, which we're going to take a look at, we're going to talk about in a second, is something totally different. So you have the learning part where you're learning this particular passage or note or chord, and then you have the motor skills. Once you have it down and got it under your fingers and you feel confident, then you can start speeding up, and that's the motor skills. Also, get away from the paper as soon as possible. Do not continue to look at it as you rehearse. It's kind of like, you know, think of it, the mind as a camera. It's clear image is a result of one shot. Once that shot is, you have it down. Try not to come back to the paper if possible. You know, sometimes you might have to. But if you keep on looking at it, like multiple exposures, if you took a picture of a picture of a picture, pretty soon by the end it becomes a blurred image. You want to get your eyes off the page as quick as possible. You don't want to be a slave to the page. Most things that I've learned are basically just you know I've memorized and should be avoided when learning. This is essential. The brain is accustomed to working in terms of milliseconds. We're not trained to work at that speed. However, and you tend to stare at the page repeatedly, this leads to less than happy circumstances, and the blur image almost already mentioned is enslavement to the notation of the page. Get off the page as quick as possible is your best bet. So that musical idea is imprinted. Try to memorize as much as you possibly can. The more you use your memory, the better your memory is going to get. Trust me, it works. Frequent rests. Now, when you're doing these small things, you want to take frequent rests at a time. One small section has been mastered. Put the guitar down, get away from the material, take a short rest. Okay, and I'm going to show you how I go about doing it. The other thing is when number 10 here, frequent rest was number 9. Number 10 is short time frames. When you're playing something, when working on new material, work in short time intervals or short intervals in order to avoid extending beyond the attention span. This may be short and may vary a great deal from day to day. Everyone's attention span varies from day to day, and you have to slowly you have to see where your attention span is. Some days I get 2 minutes is great, and other days 10 minutes is just rocking, man. But a lot of times I'm trying to keep it in the 10-minute mark, but some days I have a real tough time. So you need to. It can be anywhere from 1 minute to 10 minutes, and no more than 10 minutes. Do not go over exceed 10 minutes. Some people say 15. You could probably do 15, but no more than 10, I would say. And this can, by the way, this small time frame stuff can be done throughout the day. So if you did that one passage for 4 minutes and you came back to it 4 hours later, okay, you could do that. Now, if you wanted a practice schedule, what you could do is you could have the practice schedule could be you're going to work on this passage for 10 minutes, well, actually 8 minutes, and then I put a 2 minute break in there. Then I'll work on something else for 8 minutes, and then do a 2 minute break. Then something else for 8 minutes and do a 2 minute break, and so on and so on. And that's where your short time frames and frequent rests come into play. The other thing you want to do is before you, in that 8 minutes, you visualize in your mind's eye what you're about to play. Believe it or not, it works. They did a study with basketball players, and they had a group of basketball players on a free throw, and one group did practiced every day the free throw. The second group visualized it, and the third group did nothing. Well, the third group did nothing, well, didn't improve. The group that practiced it improved, I think it was like 5%, and the group that visualized it improved 2%. So if you use that visualization with your practicing before you pick up the guitar or play that passage or whatever you're working on, it'll come easier. So you keep that in mind. So again, frequent rest, do anywhere from a minute to 10 minutes. So if I was doing, say, 5 minute intervals, then I would do 4 minutes of practicing, 1 minute of rest. 4 minutes of practicing, 1 minute of rest. You can do 1 minute interval, 30 seconds of rest. 2 minute intervals, maybe a minute of rest or 30 seconds. You have to see. You can vary it, but just have some sort of rest in there. And sometimes I'm so busy, say I'm teaching all the time, then I might just practice a little bit here, and I just go through the whole practice schedule and just work through it. I usually actually use a timer when I'm doing that. So I set a timer, and then just set it off, and when it stops beeping, then I practice. But then I set my timer for the rest, when it beeps, then I move on to the next thing. So that's what I do. You don't have to do this, but I always have a timer. Buy these at Walmart or wherever you can, whatever works for you. So make sure you're doing the short time frames throughout. Uh, if you say you go, I'm going to do these 10 minutes, I'm going to do these 10 minutes because I can get the most out of it, that's good. But the hint is, if you stare at the wall aimlessly and or start noodling on that riff, that lick that you've been playing since you were 13 years old or whenever, or break into a song, that means your attention span is pretty much done. And again, it varies, man. It varies from day to day. So pay attention. Do not pass the point. Know when your limits are. And mine sometimes are 2, 3, 4 minutes. Okay. I can always tell. Maybe you didn't get much sleep or whatever, or stressed out. All these things do come into play. See, what you want to do is when you do the time frames, you want to do it as you're concentrating on that as uh, much as possible. You are concentrating on those notes or those passages or those chords, and that's you're just seizing the moment. When you're finished learning the new material, you can stare blankly at the TV or the moon, as he says, or anything else you like to stare at and rehearse your motor skills. So once you've got the passage down, you can practice for hours on end on that passage. That's the difference between accelerated learning. You're concentrating on something you don't know for small time frames, but once you got it down, you can practice it for hours on end. Say you're learning Dorian mode, so you've got it down, you got pattern 4 Dorian mode down, then you can practice it for hours on end, forever. You get out the metronome and work on your speed. When you work on your speed, then you work on your motor skills. That can be done for hours. But when you're doing something you don't know, it should be done in small time frames. Once you learn very small segments of the project at hand, go back and connect them. So if you've learned 3 notes here, and then on these other 3 notes, then you connect them together. Again, those can be done in small time frames. Once you've got it memorized, you can have practice for hours on end. Again, you have to know the difference. Practice learning. Always apply the approach from all the above whenever you can. In fact, rehearse the learning procedure. You should be doing this all the time. Small time frames for things you don't know, and you can practice in front of the TV for hours for just getting things down. A lot of times I'll sit there and practice on the front porch or on the couch for songs I've learned over and over and over, and just working on my speed and my cleanly and just getting everything clean. So keep that in mind. Bear in mind, this is probably the most important thing, and this is where a lot of people freak out. We live in the information age where you have information overload, and everyone thinks, oh my gosh, I got to learn all this. Bear in mind that the great masters of music have sought economy of material and have recognized that overabundance as a danger. As a carrying a threat of paralysis through overload, maintain the objective of mastering the performance of a small bit of material and play it perfectly, whatever it is. Be a living master of that small bit of material. There's a lot of guys who think they have to know every scale. If you know every scale, then you have to know your Neapolitan major, Neapolitan minor, your Hungarian major, Hungarian minor. There's a bazillion scales out there. You just need to know what you need to know for what you want to play. All the great masters did not know, and no one knows everything, and you cannot know everything. You can never even know everything in one given subject. You got to think of music as a journey, and a lot of people really mess that up. They think, oh my gosh, I got to know everything, because we do live in the information age, and there's a lot of stuff out there. Between books, tapes, MP3s, and whatever else you can find on via the internet, just Google whatever, and it is there. So you can never know it all. But what you need to know is to be a master of what you need to know. And if it's that one solo, that chord progression, or whatever, you want to get it down that you you'll be able to do that. Jimi Hendrix, he was a great player, but I don't think he could play bebop as well as, say, someone like Joe DiOrio or Pat Metheny. Just because there's great players in all their idioms, right? There's only a few and even the guys who could cover all the bases didn't know everything there is to know. Danny Gatton could play all these genres, but he still didn't know everything, and he was probably still learning. And when I took lessons with Scotty Anderson, Scotty was still practicing, you know, 4 hours a day. So I mean, and he was still learning. I mean, Ted Green was still learning. These are all great players. I mean, all of Jeff Beck is still learning. All these guys are still learning. So it never really ends. But you have to remember, you cannot know it all. Economy of materials, what is that? Know what you know. It's better to know those things really well. It's better to know those things really well, something really well, than a whole bunch of stuff really bad, or you know, not done very well. So keep that in mind. Okay. Now, so that's what accelerated learning is. Make sure that you know what you're working on, know why you're working on it. Um, avoid the distractions when you're doing it, because you're going to concentrate on that thing. Small tasks, 3 to 4 notes, small chord patterns. Know the difference. Make it slow. Isolate motor skills from learning. Remember, learning is learning those things in small time frames with breaks in between, and then the motor skills is practicing away from that. So you get with the stuff that you have it down. Remember, frequent rest, short time frames, also remember that grouping small units, put them all together, cut and paste your way through it. Always practice this learning and review it as much as possible. Again, you will find these things online, and it's by Howard Roberts. I hope that helps, and it's helped me over the years and helped many students of my students. Taught them how to play way faster, and we live in this age where, when I was a kid growing up, what took me 8 years now only takes the average kid about 4 years to learn. It's amazing what's out there. So use this stuff to your advantage. And I hope that helps. If you have any questions, don't be scared to ask. Take care. Bye bye.